We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
That is a genuinely funny commercial.
Sasquatch was like a mascot for Kokanee beer for, I don't know. I mean, the 70s and 80s probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel like the one with Rene Dahinden was way ahead of its time.
Oh, totally.
It was like the way that they cut him, like working out and doing all these funny things and like sneaking
he's got
behind
the
rocks.
speed bag and stuff. Yeah.
And the way that he was just so game to do all these fun things.
Yes.
To do this commercial. I mean, I'm sure he made money, but still he's a good sport, you know?
Yeah.
And it just shows his sense of humor.
He had a really good sense of humor.
Yeah.
He did. Yeah. Yeah. Rene Dahinden was a funny guy.
I wish I knew him because he sounds like a real good time. Like a good drinking buddy, you know?
I think that was exactly what he was. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And I mean, he didn't really take shit from people either.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but so like we talked in the last episode about how he held up the plaster cast of the Sasquatch track and was like, if anybody finds this immaterial, allow me to strike his head with it.
Yeah.
But that's at the same time like don't fuck with me, and also like taking the piss out of people.
Totally.
Like it's funny, you know.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to check out these commercials, it's the Kokanee.
Kokanee
beer.
or Kootenai.
Yeah, with Rene Dahinden. And
With
there's
Rene
other ones
Dahinden
too that are
on
great.
YouTube. Yeah,
they're so
they're
funny.
wonderful. I'll post them in the show notes.
Oh, great.
For this episode, so
Okay.
people can watch them. Yeah. So.
Okay, yeah. Oh, by the way, we're slaying monsters.
Yay.
We got Matt.
Hey.
And I'm EJ, and this is part 2 of Sasquatchery?
Yeah, part 2 of A Prehistory of Sasquatch, where we're going to talk about the origins of Sasquatch mythology and lead all the way up through what I consider the first era of Sasquatch research. And, you know, just to quickly recap, I like to break down Sasquatch research into a couple different eras. And we're talking about the era that brings us all the way up to the Patterson-Gimlin film in 1967. Because from that film, the entire scope of Sasquatch research changes, obviously, of course. Like it's
Yes.
With the surgeon's photograph of the Loch Ness Monster, it's certainly the most recognizable land cryptid evidence ever. And it might be the most recognizable cryptid evidence ever. Depends where you classify that with surgeon's photograph. But those two are like the holy grail of evidence. And so everything is going to change after that, and we'll talk about that separately. Right now, we're talking about everything that leads up to it. So we talked about the wild man of the woods last time, and we talked about Jacko, the ape man that they found on the train tracks and stunned with a boulder and brought to a jail in Yale, British Columbia, that turned out to be completely fake and was just a 4th of July stunt. And so today we're going to keep moving here, and we're going to bring it a little bit more into modern day history. We're going to bring it into the 20th century. Now, my primary source for this episode, and ultimately what's going to be the rest of the series, is John Green's book, Sasquatch, Apes Among Us. And for this episode specifically, I'll be using Claire O'Reilly's article, A Bear, a Man, a Giant, on Sasquatch as Cryptozoological Missing Link, from the Network in Canadian History and Environment magazine.
It's interesting that bear is in the title of this.
Yeah, well, you know, what's the most logical explanation when somebody sees a giant bipedal hairy thing in the woods, right? Probably a bear. And that's kind of a very dismissive take.
Sure.
I find, anyway. Like, it's easy for people to just be, it's a bear, whatever. But one of the things I really want us to get to in the course of this series is that Sasquatch is a much greater tapestry than just like, somebody saw a freaking bear, right? Like it's huge. We talked about the wild man of the woods, like, and how that mythology was built all throughout, I mean, really from, I think, the 12th century, there was this building narrative as we started to show some conquering of nature around us, you know, and the wild man kind of represents this bestial side of nature that can, sometimes it'll jump out, it'll grab you, it'll drag you away, and then slowly, like with Jacko, we started dragging the wild man out of the woods and domesticating it. And we're going to talk even more about that here today, and the quote-unquote domestication of nature as we start to break into the 1930s all the way up to like the 1950s.
Yeah, awesome.
In our last episode, we talked about Rene Dahinden, who we just watched featured in these wonderful Kokanee beer commercials. Now, he had moved from Switzerland to British Columbia, and after hearing stories about giant hairy apes, he had become obsessed with the idea of finding one himself. His investigation took him to Harrison Hot Springs, a newly formed town in the Fraser Valley in southern British Columbia. Nestled on the shores of the massive Harrison Lake, Harrison Hot Springs is one of the most important places in Sasquatch history. According to researchers, the native tribes in this region have told stories about hairy giants living in the woods surrounding this lake for generations. According to researchers.
According to researchers. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. We need to talk about these stories and these traditions because they form kind of a backbone of Sasquatch research. There's a lot of backbones of Sasquatch research, okay? You have the Patterson-Gimlin, you have the visual evidence, you have these oral traditions, you have eyewitness accounts. But one of the things that researchers tend to really hang their hats on is this, we've told these stories all throughout time. It's such a way of legitimizing what they're talking about because it's like, well, we didn't make this up. I didn't just come up with this out of the blue. I can cite these stories from the 1800s, like Jacko, or I can cite all the way back in Indigenous mythology where they talk about these creatures.
Just because they've been talked about for centuries doesn't mean that it's a Sasquatch, though.
I mean, sure, yeah.
Like, you're putting the Sasquatch onto it. Potentially. I mean, I really don't know. You're going to tell me. But
Oh yeah. We're gonna get deep in this today. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Like we talked about in the first episode, to find a Sasquatch requires you to also understand the behaviors of a population of wild or at least semi-wild animals. And that would be a population large enough to effectively breed, but small enough to remain undiscovered for centuries. Because they're real animals, right? We're not. I mean, I know that there are people like John Eric Beckjord who claim that Sasquatch is an interdimensional being and stuff like that.
Right, yes.
We're not going to talk about that because that's obviously stupid, right? It doesn't make any sense. We're going to talk about Sasquatch all throughout this series as if it is truly a wild animal, or at least semi-wild. It is an animal. It subscribes to the reality that we live in.
yes.
Okay. Indigenous stories could be an important cornerstone for our understanding of these animals then. Because after all, they predate the white settlers by centuries, and they've been living in the wilderness, exposed to all kinds of animals that the settlers might not have discovered when they just rolled up on this land. So the most common traditions used in Sasquatch research, or at least pointed to by Sasquatch researchers, are the legends of the Zunukwa and the either Bakwus or Bookwus. And we talked real briefly about these in our most recent 40 Roundup, but we're going to get real deep into them now. Now, the Bookwus or the Bakwus are humanish creatures. The Seattle Art Museum equates them actually to the wild man of the woods that we talked about in the last episode. So they were spirits of those who had been separated from their communities, either through force or through accident. So you could have been ostracized and forcibly removed from your community for committing a crime there or something like that. Or it could be one of those things where you had an accident and you were abandoned, or you fell down a ravine and they couldn't get to you or something like that, and you ended up stranded, isolated, alone in the wilderness. So living off the land, these bookwoos turned wild and dangerous. If you got stranded in the woods, you might come across one of them, be approached by them, and they might even seem kind at first and offer you food and try to help you to survive and claim that they would help you get back to your people. But if you eat that food, that will transport you over to the ghost world, and that will make you into a bookwoo yourself.
Okay, so these things are technically dead, so they're spirits.
Yes, they're spirits.
Okay, so they're not just like random dude is like, I'm fuck this, I'm done. Like I'm tired of this.
Right. No, not like that.
9 to 5 life. No. I'm gonna go. Okay.
No, these are people. The assumption is that they've died.
Okay.
They've died and they've passed over into the spirit world. But the thing is, once they're in the spirit world, they seem to be either malicious or tricksterish. And so if they find you, they're going to try to pull you into the spirit world alongside them.
Okay.
And so it's kind of a great big metaphor for be careful what you see in the woods, because it might be trying to kill you.
Yeah,
right?
There's so many things like this throughout all of history, throughout all cultures, like just beware of the woods. And
absolutely.
There's
yeah.
like the will-o'-the-wisp that draws people in. And it does make me think of the trickster of Pan and all these things. So
absolutely,
it's cool how different cultures have these interesting parallels.
Yeah. Now these bookwoos, they're sometimes associated with the Zunukwa, although the Zunukwas tend to be exclusively female. And she is more monstrous in appearance than the bookwoos, which tend to look more human. So bookwoos are, remember, they're these human spirits that have died and are now on the other side. The Zunukwa, they actually sometimes refer to her as like an ogre or a troll or something like that. So she's really a monster, okay? She's this big black creature with these hairy hands, and she will steal children to eat their flesh.
Sounds like a bear.
I mean, maybe a little bit.
Sounds like a black bear.
But,
okay.
Well,
sorry.
sort of. Except, so she also speaks a language.
Okay.
You know, she can
communicate
your language.
Yeah, okay.
And she tends to mimic your grandmother's voice. So if you're in the woods, you might hear your grandmother calling to you, and then you follow the voice, and you come upon the Zunukwa instead.
Oh wow! So she's like very mischievous,
yes.
Very intelligent.
Very intelligent, yes.
Manipulative. So she's more of a psychological kind of a creature in my head. Like she gets you in psychologically. So does the other one.
Yes, yeah. So maybe less like a troll and more of a Baba Yaga type of figure.
Okay, sure.
A little bit like that. Less of the witch type thing. But the eating children, absolutely.
Sure,
yeah.
like the Hansel and Gretel situation.
Yeah. You can spot a Zunukwa by her pursed red lips and her pronounced brow ridge. They may be immortal. It depends on what mythology you're reading, but they might be immortal, and that immortality manifests in the power of regeneration. So like if you cut off her arm will grow back. Apparently the only way to kill her is to burn her alive, which again is very similar to like a troll.
Oh, okay. Oh, because of the sunlight, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So this is like one of the standard masks of how she looks.
Oh, she's scary. I've never seen that before. Wow.
Yeah. And so, you know, people sometimes point to that mask and they're like, oh, it's vaguely ape-like, I guess.
I don't
think it's ape-like.
I don't see that at all. She has a very she kind of just looks like she's had too much work done. You know, she's got like the really distinct cheekbones.
Yeah, she does have a little bit of that like sunken cheekbone.
Yeah, and the nose
look.
looks like it's been very Hollywoodified. Like, wow. Yeah, and she's got like the permanent pursed lips that you see.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. So she's had work done. We know this.
Uh-huh. Well, when you're a Zunukwa, you gotta look pretty, right?
You do. I think she's very pretty.
You got to keep up, because otherwise you're not going to get the roles.
You're not going to get any of the roles.
You got to keep up with it.
Yep, exactly. These Zanuquas.
Yes.
They are from the northwestern area or northwestern tribes?
Yeah, so we're talking about the Pacific Northwest indigenous tribes. We're talking specifically about the Chehalis tribe. And that encompasses basically northern Oregon, Washington, up through Vancouver, British Columbia, that whole Pacific Northwest region.
Okay.
Artistic depictions of these two creatures can be found carved on totem poles and as the wooden masks that we just looked at, often adorned with hair. And it's compelling if we assume that these indigenous people were carving things that they had actually seen. If that was true, then you would say, oh my God, you're depicting something that you picked out of, you saw on Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
You saw this on Wednesday, you carved it on Saturday. Because these bukwoos, these Zuniquas, they look so radically different from any other animal in the wilderness that people say, oh my God, how did they come up with this?
They can't possibly have an imagination.
And this is one of the things I always find puzzling, is that we assume that indigenous people from all over the world, and not even necessarily indigenous, but just any culture that's older than ours.
Yeah, any older culture.
We assume that they were only capable of drawing or carving things that they saw with their own eyes. Mm-hmm. And in a modern world full of superheroes, dragons, elder gods, and mutant turtles, I think it's bizarre that anyone would look at our current media and art and just assume that someone here has seen Daenerys' dragon mount, or the Demogorgon, or the Rancor, or the Predator, or whatever, right? Yet we are so stuck in our ways believing that our ancestors couldn't possibly imagine something so wild as a humanoid with long hair who lives in the woods.
Yeah.
You know? I admit that it's still possible that the bukwoos and the Zanuqua are based on a real animal. But it's also worth pointing out that they are not the only fantastic monsters in the Chehalis folklore. Take the Sasayul, a well-known monster in the Pacific Northwest. The Sasayul is a multi-headed serpent, comes with 3 heads, okay? 2 of the heads are snake heads, and the third, which is actually in the center of the body, is a human head. So you got a head on the head, you got a head on the tail, and then you got a human head in the middle. All of these heads have horns, and it has a segmented body like a caterpillar rather than a snake. If you find one of these creatures and you kill it, you can drink its blood and become invincible, kind of like a vampire. Okay?
Cool.
And if you keep one alive near your home, that will ward off evil spirits.
I feel like that's the most evil spirit there is, so of course nothing else is going to come
right?
near.
Yeah, nothing's going to fuck with you
exactly.
if you have one of these things. They're also just weird looking.
Yeah.
You might have even come across the scales of a Sasayul because they're left behind on the beaches. They look exactly like mica rocks.
Oh, that's cool. Mica is very scaly.
Yeah.
That's what I always liked
It looks
about
like scales, right?
Yeah.
Or what about, okay, please bear with me for this pronunciation. Okay. What about the Baxback Walla Nuxsiwe? Baxback Walla Nuxsiwe.
Nailed it.
That's also called the cannibal at the north end of the world.
Oh, what a cool... That is
dude.
What?
And this thing is horrifying.
Okay, that needs to be made into a horror novel like yesterday.
It's in a couple... I think it's in anime somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the title, The Cannibal at the North End of the World...
The north end, too. It's the specificity.
It's the specificity.
Like, don't fucking go to the north end of the world, dude.
Do not go there. And it's like... Oh, like... Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
But this is great. So,
yes.
So this was a gigantic, vaguely bear-shaped creature, meaning that it's got like the 4 limbs and it's kind of, I don't want to call bears fat, but they got some bulk to them.
Yeah, they're hefty.
They're hefty.
Mm-hmm.
But this thing is covered in hundreds of gaping mouths. So there are just mouths all over its body.
Wow.
In the mythology, it was outsmarted by a shaman who was able to trap it in a pit, and then that shaman blew dust onto it, and broke the monster into a bunch of little tiny monsters, bloodthirsty monsters.
Ooh.
Do you know what it broke them into?
Mosquitoes?
Exactly.
Sounds like the Wendigo.
Yeah.
That is really horrifying.
Yeah, I know.
Especially if they're all talking at the same time, too.
Well, they weren't all talking. They were all making, I think, a ha, ha, ha sound.
Oh my God, what?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you're in the woods and you just hear, like, ha, 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 like, over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Oh, man. And they probably have crazy teeth.
Oh, yeah. You know that. Yeah, of course they do. Yeah.
Oh, God. Okay, that's scary.
Yep.
I like it.
So, why aren't there legions of monster hunters combing the Pacific Northwest looking for these Sasquatches or the
Cannibal at the north
end of the world? Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. Why do we glom onto the Sasquatch idea instead?
That is a great question.
Because when we examine these myths side by side, I don't think there's anything more compelling about the Bookwoos and the Zunukwa unless you cherry pick them because you're comparing them to Sasquatches. Remember, the Zunukwa, they're immortal and they regenerate. Like, that's crazy, dude.
Yeah. And one has a bunch of mouths on it.
Right. Yeah.
So why did we simplify it? Why did the white person walk in and simplify this story?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Do you have a theory?
I could it be like their own history? Like they came in with their like wild man of the woods and they put their understanding upon something that they didn't understand. It could be that it was just easier. I don't know. Because of the bears? All the bears.
Because bears.
Because bears. I don't know.
No, so we'll get a little deeper into it in just a couple of minutes here. But it was a way of helping to draw a dividing line between what the white settlers and later on the white civilized, quote unquote, civilized people called savage versus civilized. It was a way of very specifically drawing that line of being, which side do you want to fall on? Do you want to end up like your Bookwoos, or do you want to end up like a good, God-fearing Christian civilized person?
I vote Bookwoo.
I mean, yeah, they seem much cooler, right?
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into that, there's a whole complexity to the way that indigenous peoples interacted with their own mythology, too. The Dominican University's Encyclopedia of World Mythology says, many Native Americans believed that some myths could be told only at certain times, often during winter nights. A dire fate, such as being attacked by snakes, awaited those who told stories at the wrong time. Other myths resembled folk tales. They could be fun to teach a lesson or about proper behavior, and those who told them were free to change or add elements to the basic story. Essentially, these weren't even necessarily true, factual, historical accounts that they were saying. They were always kind of these teaching stories or fireside tales that you would speak and you would recite, and they would tell you something about the world. But they weren't necessarily meant to be taken literally at face value.
Like the Bible.
Exactly like the Bible, actually. Yeah, I mean, the Bible, the intention of the Bible, and this is a whole other debate, but the intention of the Bible really is not to be taken at face value. It's the same thing. It's a book full of mythology that is meant to teach a lesson.
Yeah, parables.
Yeah, not necessarily historically accurate.
No.
As far as their depiction on totem poles, Bookwoos and Zunukwa are just two of the many creatures that are found in indigenous art, of course. According to the University of British Columbia's First Nations and Indigenous Studies Foundation, totem poles are more about the history of the people than about those animals anyway. They say most totem poles display beings or crest animals, marking a family's lineage and validating the powerful rights and privileges that family had. Totem poles would not necessarily tell a story so much as it would serve to document the stories and histories familiar to its community members or a particular family or clan members.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And they're multifaceted, too. Commemorative poles act like statues, and they serve as a way to honor an individual who deserved to be remembered. Then you had mortuary poles that were like grave markers, tombstones, essentially. And then you had shame poles that were put up to mock other tribes.
Wow, we could really use some of those today.
I know, right?
I feel like shame has just left our society altogether.
Yeah, shame was a powerful human emotion that was very useful.
Yeah, now people just double down instead of be shamed.
Well, you just push past, I think. You just push past. And that's why you can't push past the totem pole, right?
See,
it's always fucking there.
Yes, because we have such a short attention span and we move on all the time because of social media. We can't hang on to any single thing. So if you have a totem pole, it's like you are, remember how much of a cock you are?
Yeah.
Here. Like we need to bring them into the...
Reject social media, embrace totem poles.
Absolutely. Just be ashamed of yourself. You should be so ashamed.
Hey, I'm doing a good job.
You're doing the best you can.
I do what I can. And then, of course, other totem poles were just decorative supports of houses. Now, the animals themselves represented on these totem poles were representations of the attributes of the tribe or the person who owned the pole. So you have bears representing power, raccoons. What do you think raccoons represented?
Probably like opportunity.
Curiosity.
Oh, curiosity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Crows. What do you think crows represented?
I mean, they're very smart.
Yeah.
Intelligence?
Yeah, creativity and cunning.
Okay. All right. Okay. We're stretching it a little bit. I don't know if I'm right, but cunning. Okay. Cunning's close.
I'll give you one more. What did wolves represent? Think about how wolves' social structure exists.
Yeah. Family, I guess?
Loyalty.
Oh, loyalty. Ah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Indigenous artists, they didn't carve animals on the poles because they were like, oh, I saw a wolf the other day. Mm-hmm. They did it as a way of symbolically representing the virtues that those animals embodied. Mm-hmm. So all that is to say that totem poles should not be taken as literal accounts. They're not comic books. They should be treated as pieces of stylized art. It's like somebody trying to track down the real-life Batman because they saw someone had a Dark Knight bust in their house. That is what happens when you see a Zunukwa and you're like, oh, that's a real animal. Let's go find it.
Yeah, I think that's what's so crazy to me, is that is literally what people are doing.
Right.
And not only that, but they're going after something that's mythological, but it's also extra mythological because they made it up too. Like they...
Oh yeah, they
morphed it.
An existing mythological creature, modified that mythology, and are now searching for it as if it's a real animal.
Yes!
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's basically saying, I saw a Batman comic at the comic book store, but I actually prefer Batman to be Kitty Cat Man with, he carries around a pail of turtles. And so I'm going to go into the...
So we need to go find the pail.
We need to go find the pail of turtles.
Yeah, let's go find the pail of turtles, and that way we can find Batman.
We'll find Kitty Cat Man.
Kitty Cat Man, who is Batman. Yeah, pretty much. Or maybe to not go so far-fetched with it.
Okay, whatever. It's pretty normal to me.
It would be like reading a Batman comic and saying, this must be based on real life, but I believe that this was probably based on a gigantic flying bat. So let's go find the gigantic flying bat that this comic is based on. It's kind of that, right?
Right.
Because in this situation, too, Bookwoos, the Zuniquas, they're smart animals. They're actually people, right? Like they have intelligences. They behave much more like human beings than animals. But now we've taken that and we've made it into like bipedal ape creature things, and now we're looking for those.
That's not the craziest leap because they are intelligent mythological creatures.
Sure.
So to humanize them, it's I understand why they would want to humanize them because they are already speaking and they're in their,
Right.
But it's weird though, because the mythology of the Sasquatch, I don't believe it speaks.
It doesn't. No. Generally now, traditionally it doesn't.
Right. So it's kind of gone back into being more of an animal
Right, and we're going to talk about that transition probably in the next episode.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a whole other piece of all of this misinterpretation of totem poles, mythology, iconography. And unfortunately, that's a very decidedly racist one. Daniel Loxton and Donald R. Prothero, in their book, Abominable Science, talk at length about the Zunukwa and her place in Indigenous mythology. In their research, she is a singular character, not a race of hairy people. She's more of, like we talked about, a Baba Yaga, like a wicked witch type of thing, luring these children away and eating them. And they say, whether this retrofitting forces native traditions into one or several Bigfoot-shaped boxes, it is an exercise in confirmation bias. Bigfoot enthusiasts look back over native lore with an expectation of finding Bigfoot. They seize on tales of a fabulous creature that resembles the Bigfoot they expected to find, while ignoring or reinterpreting the stories that do not. Then, having projected a modern Bigfoot onto a disparate native legends, enthusiasts make the circular argument that Native American traditions confirm the existence of Bigfoot.
Wow.
At best, the projection of modern monsters into Native American stories flattens context and nuance. At worst, it may become a naive and even ugly sort of paternalism in which whites tell Native Americans what their tales really mean.
Yeah.
And when it comes to reinterpreting mythology and making it whiter, no one does it better than J.W. Burns. You have no idea who that is. It's fine.
I don't know.
Let's talk about him.
Okay.
So Burns was a school teacher at the Chehalis Indian Day School in the 1920s and 1930s. Now this means that he was one of the white instructors who was tasked with, quote, civilizing the, quote, savage Indigenous children. Or, to put it bluntly, strip them of their tribal customs and traditions and force Christianity on them.
Yeah, basically daily abuse.
Yes. Now, these institutions executed their racist conquest through a multi-pronged approach, all designed to divorce the Indigenous children from their cultural identity. Instructors had them wear uniforms, refused to let them speak in their native tongue, gave them a new Christian name, usually like a saint or something like that, and abused the students who didn't comply. And when I was reading over my notes for this episode and reading those things, I was struck with, oh my God, that is actually exactly how cults treat their members.
Oh wow, yeah. You strip them down.
Yeah,
everything that they are.
Take them away, make them all wear uniforms. Don't let them, don't let them speak in their native language or talk to their people, you know. Give them new names and abuse the people who don't comply. Very cultish. Maybe the most disgusting of all is the number of children who died at these places. A 2021 NBC News article reported mass graves found at multiple Canadian Indian boarding schools with over 1,500 bodies of dead children. Graham Lee Brewer writes for NBC saying, the governments of Canada and the US didn't just take the culture of the Indigenous children that both countries attempted to assimilate through boarding schools. In countless cases, they also took these children's lives, each one representing a stolen generation. So, J.W. Burns was working at one of these racist death traps. And in his time there, he overheard many of the stories that these children and their relatives would tell, including the story of a race of giant wild people called the Sasquatch. According to Burns and his retelling of their stories, the Sasquatch were giant humans, developed enough to have tools and make fire and live in constructed shelters. They were called hairy giants. That's his quotes, hairy giants. But that phrase meant more that they were like unkempt. When I say hairy, not that they were like shaggy, but more like long hair, beards, that kind of thing. like the wild man of the woods of mythology.
Yeah, like what I look like when I wake up in the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess that despite their tools and weapons, they never bothered to make like combs and razors.
It's just not important to them.
I guess not.
Yeah.
Burns even says that they could speak to people and help you in rituals due to their magical abilities. Not quite like the ape-like archetype that we see today, roaming through the woods and looking for jerky or kootenai beer. Now, it's possible that when Burns was recounting these stories, he got taken for a ride, and the people around him were laughing behind his back. Like, they could have just been making a joke. Maybe, they were trying to, like, make up the most outrageous stories they could in order to fool this silly white teacher, Mm-hmm. Or, as Loxton and Prothero point out, he may have been in on that joke. See, Burns published an article cataloging these stories in Maclean's magazine in 1929 on April 1st, or April Fool's Day.
Oh.
Now, it's possible that this whole thing, his whole Sasquatch hairy giants thing, was just an elaborate hoax.
Oh. And this was on April 1st?
This is on April 1st.
Wow.
But even if it was a joke, Burns's own disparaging opinions of the native people shine through here. Because at one point he declared that they were too unimaginative to invent this kind of story, which just goes to show how much he underestimated the people that he taught.
What a dick.
Yeah, he kind of is.
You fucking asshole.
Also, according to Lauren Coleman, Burns stole a ritual Sasquatch mask from the Chehalis people in about 1939, probably hoping that it was going to like back up his ridiculous stories about these wild hairy people. And that mask was missing for 75 years before it was finally returned to the Chehalis.
Wow.
Yeah, he's not a great guy.
Is the Sasquatch a real thing? Like, is that a true Native American?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's real.
Interesting.
It's true mythology. Yeah. But there again, it's no different than the Zunukwa or the Bookwus. It's the same deal.
But it's hairy and bipedal.
Right.
And...
But remember, again, that hairy just means it has long hair.
So, really...
It's not fuzzy.
Okay, so really we've kind of gone back to this wild man of the woods idea.
Once again, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, currently, right now, all roads are leading back to the wild man of the woods.
Right.
I think there's another element to these stories as well, and that comes from the attitude of these schools. As we talked before, if your mission is to divorce these children from their quote-unquote savage and quote-unquote barbaric ways and try to instill a quote-unquote civilized upbringing to them, mm-hmm. If you're trying to make them Christians, essentially, wild men are the perfect scapegoat. So think about this. That creates a cultural divide. Do the children want to be clean, proper young men and women like you, their teacher? Or do they want to be these hairy, wild people lurking in the woods, eating human flesh, and performing decidedly unchristian magical rituals? The Zunukwa, the Sasquatch, or the Sasquatch, they were the ideal boogeyman used to guide these children away from their identity. We know anytime you can use a culture's own stories for your agenda, it greases the wheels of colonialism. Look at the origins of Christianity and how the pagan rituals of Saturnalia and Yule and Ostara became Christmas and Easter.
That's how they also converted the peoples of like the
mm-hmm.
British Isles and the Ireland,
yep.
and they just took their ideas and kind of helped made them more palatable.
Exactly.
Made them more Christian.
Exactly. And they're doing it here as well.
Mm-hmm.
Forming that foundation using these traditional beliefs is a massively effective way to bridge that cultural gap. The Sasquatch mythology could very well be the same thing. Claire O'Reilly, an environmental historian at Trent University, believes that the evolution of Sasquatch was the result of Euro-North humans imprinting their own fears about the dangers of not subscribing to human norms, which kind of supports this idea again. She says, monsters uphold boundaries for human society. defining who humans are in opposition to who we are not. The monster, right? Sasquatch exists simultaneously outside of and within binaries. It upholds settler conceptions of frontier in which nature is unknown, potentially dangerous, and ultimately ripe with mythic discovery for Euro-North Americans. But it also works to erode these boundaries, prompting us to question dominant narratives about human-non-human relationships.
It really speaks to two different sides of ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, that dichotomy is what the Sasquatch mythology is. Now, J.W. Burns had been teaching at a school not too far from Harrison Hot Springs, a resort town in British Columbia. About a decade after his tenure, where he coined the term Sasquatch in his April 1st article, a journalist named John Green arrived in town. Green was born in Vancouver. His father was a member of Parliament. His mother was the daughter of a lumber baron. She was also the first woman to graduate from the University of British Columbia School of Agricultural Sciences. Green attended Columbia University, where he graduated with a master's in journalism. While in New York, he wrote for the Globe and the Mail before transferring to their Vancouver branch. Now, this guy, John Green, at this time, he's very handsome.
Is he?
Yeah, he looks quite a bit like Michael Rennie, who played the alien Klaatu in The Day the Earth Stood Still.
I have no idea what the hell you just said, but okay.
The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah.
Klaatu Barada Nektu.
Oh, yeah, okay. Very vaguely. I've never seen this movie. Do you think he is handsome?
He's not...
So?
Compared to some...
He's fine.
Without naming any names, compared to some Sasquatch researchers, I think John Green is on the side of handsome.
Okay,
How about
okay.
that?
You know how we have, like, office hot?
Yeah.
Well, I think we can have Sasquatch hot.
Okay, so John Green is Sasquatch hot.
He's Sasquatch hot.
Okay.
Because you're right. It's a little... The scales are a little different when we're talking about Bigfoot hunting.
Yeah.
Although I will say, a young Rene Dahinden...
Rene Dahinden's actually better looking than he is.
I do think so.
Yeah.
I do think so.
Thanks to his affluent upbringing, Green understood the ins and outs of the political machine. And he was also an outdoorsy guy who never felt more at home than when he was on a lake. So he raced sailboats, and he actually founded the World Sand Sculpture Championship.
What?
Yeah.
Aw.
That World Sand Sculpture Championship takes place on the shore of Harrison Lake in Harrison Hot Springs.
Really? Like,
Yes.
to this day?
Yes.
Wow. Cute.
He married in 1948, a year after graduating from Columbia, and they bounced around a little before finally settling back in his home region, the Fraser Valley of British Columbia. In 1954, Green moved to Agassiz, which is a small town 8 miles south of Harrison Hot Springs. I'm sure this was ideal for him, because he's got access to his favorite lake, he's got an up-and-coming resort town nearby, and a sleepy little community that he lives in and he can kind of preside over. Because he likes politics. Mm-hmm. He likes getting into politics.
He's also, like, already rich, right?
Yeah.
Because his mommy was a
his
logging baron?
Yeah, his mother was from a lumber baron family, and his father was a member of Parliament.
Okay, so he's white with a lot of time on his hands.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And he graduated from Columbia, dude. He's a journalist, you know.
Okay.
He wasted no time, and he bought the local newspaper, the Agassiz Harrison Advance. Now, this was a small-town newspaper named for the Swiss family who settled the region. While starting a career as this newspaper publisher, Green is also kind of keeping his eye on the political landscape of the region. And he starts attending town hall meetings and events, and slowly building the foundation for his own political aspirations. Growing up in southwestern Canada, Green, he caught wind of Sasquatch, probably because of J.W. Burns' misrepresentation of it. It's not like the stories were some hidden secret at the time. Everybody talked about these wild men living in the woods. In a 2003 speech at the Willow Creek China Flats Museum, Green said, "Sasquatch were not commonly thought of as completely hair-covered creatures living much the same life as a bear. Instead, their public image was that of a tribe of giant Indians, hairy only on their heads, who lived in villages, held annual get-togethers on a special mountain, and used signal fires.
What?
Yeah. So these are the stories that John Green grew up with. Is essentially, it's almost like it's just an undiscovered tribe.
Just people in the woods.
Yeah, it's just people living in the woods.
So then there was a switch at some point to the hairy
Exactly. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so that hadn't happened yet.
It has not happened.
Wow.
He's coming in and he's still thinking that they're essentially just people living in the woods.
They just fucked off.
They had get-togethers. They had like potlucks, dude.
Yeah.
Okay. Never one to pass up the opportunity to make a joke. Green decided to run a fake news story for his newspaper's first April Fool's Day.
Another April Fool's one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on April 1st, 1955, he published an article that he fully intended to be a joke. Like, he did. But this is now the third time that Sasquatch reporting has been associated with a fool's holiday. We've got the July 4th, 1884 capture of Jacko, which was, that was when you had foolish, kind of silly news stories. J.W. Burns' 1929 article on the Sasquatch, and Green's article now in 1955. Now, in Green's make-believe story, a beautiful visitor staying at the Harrison Hot Springs Hotel had been abducted by a hairy monster and carried off into the woods. That's the story that he told. That's the like silly article that he wrote. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, no. You don't find it hilarious.
No. When did King Kong come out?
33.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely playing on a little bit of that.
Yeah. The idea of okay.
Gorillas in cinema were not uncommon at the time, and attacking women and carrying them away and stuff. It's not a crazy foreign idea.
Right.
Okay?
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, to Green, this was just like a funny fluff piece. Something to give the residents a chuckle. He never intended for anyone to take it seriously. Which is why it was so surprising when a Swiss adventurer named Rene Dahinden walked into the newspaper's office shortly after and demanded, "You give me more information on this creature."
Oh. Or, John Green.
Yeah. John Green, how are you now? Good.
Good, you?
Not so bad. I need some information on this creature. Remember, Dahinden, he heard about hairy wild men first from the Canadian radio broadcast in reference to the Yeti, the Himalayan Sasquatch. And he's been fascinated by the existence of these creatures. He's been spending all of his free time trying to get more information on them. He himself, again, he's an outdoors guy too. He's been organizing his own hunts in his spare time, and he's been combing the surrounding wilderness in hopes of finding some kind of evidence of this creature.
I can just picture him so well. This highly determined man in his flannel and his jeans.
Oh yeah.
His tight jeans probably. I'm not being weird. I'm just saying. He's really all tucked in and
absolutely.
He's got his big boots on and his hat.
Yeah. And poor John Green, who's this well-to-do, affluent guy. He's working in his newspaper office, and it's a small newspaper for a small community, dude. He's writing about somebody who put up a new fence in their community or something, right? He's writing these small-time articles, and then all of a sudden this dude walks in and is like, "That story you wrote," and he's like, "Yeah, it's not real." He's like, "Yes, it is. It's absolutely real."
So great.
So Dahinden, also following the reports from J.W. Burns, he arrived in Agassiz thinking that he's found ground zero of the Sasquatch. To him, Green's joke story about the missing maiden meant that this is the perfect place to go hunting for the monster. Now, Green, of course, grew up believing that the Sasquatch was nothing but an old wives' tale of people living in the woods, right?
Right.
He dismissed Dahinden. In his book, Sasquatch Apes Among Us, he says he felt sorry for the guy. Probably sorry for the guy. And he tried to explain this whole thing, it's a joke, it's a stunt. And I wrote it as this fluff piece. Mm-hmm. But the idea And Dahinden's insistent belief never left Green's mind. As he built his newspaper business, he began laying the groundwork for his political career as well. Running for a low-level political office, Green found himself often deep in these local politics, right around the time of British Columbia's centennial. This is 1957, 100 years after the founding of British Columbia, and the provincial government wants to do something to celebrate. Okay? They offered a cash prize to any community who could come up with an event that would be appropriate for their celebration. News of this funding quickly spread through the region's newspapers, including the Agassiz-Harrison Advance. John Green brought the idea of a prize before the city council, because this is good for him, right? He's excited because if he can secure the funding that the parliament is offering, that would be a gigantic boost to his political career and an influx of money into his town. Remembering this strange guy who stormed into his office demanding information on fake Sasquatch abductions, Green offers a unique proposal to the city council. Harrison Hot Springs should host the first annual Centennial Sasquatch Hunt.
I love this.
So now, still believing that this is kind of a crock, right? Not believing this at all. He's headed down after Dahinden. Dahinden's already like I'm going hunting Sasquatch no matter what.
He's
and
already out there.
John Green's like, yeah, but what if we monetize it?
Yeah.
They wanted to organize a community hunt for a creature from Indigenous legends. And again, this is a joke, right? Mm-hmm. John Green himself even said, quote, "It was, of course, a bid for publicity." So this is all just a way to make the Centennial Committee pay attention to this little town of Harrison Hot Springs and Agassiz, maybe get some sweet, sweet funding. Ultimately, Green's goofy hunt lost the bid and did not get funding.
Oh.
Well, I think they wanted to give it to something that was real. Basically.
Oh, okay. And probably something that also didn't involve a bunch of like half-drunk dudes wandering in the woods with guns.
Yeah, because that's absolutely what would have happened, right?
Yeah.
Because it's going to be associated with a centennial party as well, too. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you would get a bunch of people drunk and then be like, let's all get fucking rifles and go wander through the woods and shoot a monster that nobody even knows what it looks like. And at the time, they're like, yeah, it's like a long-haired dude. Like,
oh, they would have shot each other.
No. And there's nobody left in town to spend the money.
Right.
The province newspaper out of Vancouver quoted one of the council members calling the idea a, quote, venture into the world of fantasy at the ratepayer's expense. The wholly logical decision not to fund this bogus expedition hit Rene Dahinden very hard. He publicly accused the committee of being too afraid to hunt the Sasquatch.
Ooh, so that sounds like him.
He's going to war with the council now.
Yeah.
The committee fired back and demanded basically that he say it to their face in the next meeting.
Oh, he would.
So Rene Dahinden did, I assume using some kind of colorful language, and he attended the meeting, shouted at them, mm-hmm. and stormed out, vowing to hunt down the Sasquatch in, quote, his own way.
I love him.
John Green, for his part, laughed off the committee's answer and went back to his business. The stunt had actually indirectly achieved what he had intended. He said, "It was tremendously successful. Papers all over Canada played the story on the front page." So while they didn't get the money, they did get publicity. And Green got publicity along with it. Harrison Hot Springs is suddenly on the map because now it has its own hook. Sasquatch. A reward notice went out offering a cash prize to bring in the Sasquatch, as the province said, quote, dead or with tongue in cheek.
Okay.
Even the prize was a joke. Mm-hmm. You know, like everybody's just kind of joking around. It's this funny thing, right? The only person who's not joking is Rene Dahinden, who, the poor guy, thinks it's all at his expense.
Aww.
But he refused to give up. He focused on the brighter side, because the building media frenzy was keeping his quest visible too. So Dahinden started searching nearby caves, positive that one of them would reveal a dwelling of the Sasquatch. But unfortunately, without the necessary funding, he had to make money however he could. So he was working for the Vancouver Gun Club and collected lead shot from their range and then resold it to ammunition manufacturers. So literally his job was to go out after people shot their guns at the gun range and it shut down. He would collect all the spent shells and then sell them back to ammunition suppliers.
Smart.
Yeah. Remember, at this time, Sasquatch is still considered a wild human, not an animal. More of like an undiscovered civilization.
Okay.
So Dahinden's explorations were looking for evidence of fires or intelligently constructed structures or tools or writings, something that could be linked to this mythical race of wild people. Even J.W. Burns threw his hat in the ring. And speaking out after a 2-decade silence, he said, Sasquatch originated in British Columbia and is of Chehalis descent. Various Indians say Sasquatches they encountered speak the same language.
Okay.
So even he is saying they're just like humans.
They're just people in the woods.
They're just people in the woods. Okay, so now there's a big spotlight shining on this little community and its small town monster. John Green's little newspaper is breaking a story that could potentially upset our knowledge of indigenous tribes in the Pacific Northwest. And of course, that's selling papers, and that's bringing wide-eyed hunters and explorers into the Fraser Valley. In short, Sasquatch is really good for business. This all makes it seem like John Green was spearheading some kind of elaborate media hoax, but I really don't think he was. Green was an educated journalist raised from upper-class stock with a pretty good head on his shoulders. But I do think he became a victim of his own flamboyant reporting.
How so?
Green started hunting through old reports and articles, trying to find other stories about hairy giants living in the woods. And it didn't take long to find them. After the Centennial Sasquatch Hunt debacle, local people even started sending Green their own stories about wild men. You remember Jacko? The wild man of the woods found on the train tracks and sent to prison? That ultimately turned out to be absolutely nothing? That story, now half a century old at this point, was one of the very first to cross Green's desk. And as he continued to dig, Green was able to locate several people who remembered the story circulating in the press during the 1880s. Green even interviewed one of the old-timers who recalled the story, a man named August Castle. Castle had been a young man at the time and couldn't convince his parents to take him to see the wild man, but he vividly recalled the media firestorm surrounding the capture and display of this creature. Remember, it's not real.
Right.
You know?
But does he know that it's real? Did August believe that it was real?
August Castle believed that it was real, and he just never got to see it.
Okay. I'm sure many people actually did continue to believe it's real, even though it came out as a hoax. So.
I mean, and we've talked before about once you launch this story, it's hard to backpedal on it. You know, within a week, there was critical takes on that story from other newspapers, but it didn't matter once the story was out there.
Yeah.
If you didn't read those other newspapers, you might never know.
It's like Pizzagate.
It's like a lot of stuff now. Yeah. I suspect this was about the time that John Green had a revelatory moment. It would be about 1958, the year following the failed Sasquatch hunt. He's in the middle of this investigation. He admitted later that he'd laughed off Rene Dahinden and his crazy theories, but then he started to believe it. What if Dahinden was right? What if there was something out there? Look at this story of Jacko, you know? What if all those indigenous stories that he'd read from J.W. Burns were based on fact? This is his thought process. One of the most dangerous fallacies is post hoc reasoning. By its nature, the idea that two events are connected or related when they're merely coincidental. An example of this is the idea that cows lie down before it rains. Sure, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And, you know, if you see cows lying down and then it rains, you might make the connection that when cows lie down, it rains. That's post hoc reasoning.
I always used to think that was true.
It's not true.
That them lying down was a sign of an incoming rain.
It's not true. No, smart cows will go in a barn when it rains.
That is very true.
Also, most of the time, cows don't give a shit.
If you really gave a shit about rain, I think the last thing you want to do is lie down on the ground where it's going to be rainier and grosser.
You would think so, yeah.
But, you know, it's just me. I feel like this whole episode is just all about post hoc reasoning, though.
Yeah.
Like the entire thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, okay, let's go back, let's re-examine and see if we can find connecting threads during our re-examination. But they're coming in with this mindset now that's like, well, I have to find things that fit my current narrative.
Yeah.
That's what everybody's doing. It's what Burns, Dahinden, and Green are doing with their Indigenous stories. Once the idea of a Sasquatch gets imprinted in their brains, they go off looking for all the other instances where they can find reporting similar to hairy apes, and they're finding it everywhere. And so now, here's the situation. You've got Green on one side, talking about Jacko, how that could have been a Sasquatch. You've got Burns recounting old mythology, claiming that it describes the same animal. And then you've got Dahinden running around in the woods looking for caves that he's read about in old folk tales. And all the while, you got tourists flooding into this area and businesses are realizing that there's money to be made in Sasquatch. Now, up until this point, our intrepid researchers are relying on past accounts and old folklore. They don't have any stories from modern people who have actually encountered a living Sasquatch.
That is a great point, because you'd think that if they were there with all those loggers, there would be something.
You would, right?
Yeah.
But guess what?
What?
That's all about to change with the story of Ruby Creek and the first documented Sasquatch attack. But we will pick up with that story next time.
Yay! When Sasquatches attack.
That's right. So this is the situation that we're in now. Mm-hmm. You got these two tiny little Canadian towns that are, I mean, Rene Dahinden theorized it, and it's true. They are ground zero. This is where all of this shit's coming out of. And we're going to see, this is where the mythology of Sasquatch originates.
I always wondered why it was in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. We're going to talk even more about this continued build because it's about to leap forward. You know, at this point, they're still just recounting these older stories, trying to find the threads in them. But we're about to get to the people who are like, yeah, I actually saw one with my own eyes. I got attacked by one. I got carted off by one and lived with them for 6 days. You know, all of these stories now. And perhaps the most important element in all Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti, everything is about to hit. They're about to find tracks.
Awesome. And this is where it starts to morph from the man in the woods to an animal. An animal.
Yes.
And we'll
see that next time.
What's interesting is that we've got the Yeti already, right?
Yes.
So the Yeti is an animal.
Yeah, the Yeti was an animal. Mm-hmm.
And that was an older story.
Right.
But it's interesting because they didn't think to grab onto the Yeti idea until much later.
I think the Yeti was, as weird as it is to say, I think the Yeti was exotic. I think that they looked at the Yeti kind of the way you look at like an elephant. And you say like, well, you know, that is in India.
That's over there.
You know,
like
that. Obviously, that animal is there. Mm-hmm. That animal is not here. Mm-hmm. You know, we have a Bengal tiger, right? Right. You got your Bengal tiger. We don't have a Bengal tiger here. Mm-hmm. Also, there have been no evidence of it. You know, that's a big claim for someone. When you say, you know, we have all these animals, we have all these naturalists who have been roaming through the woods for hundreds of years, and they haven't found a giant hairy ape in the Pacific Northwest or you know, anywhere in Canada or anywhere in America.
Well, that's the thing that I'm really interested in, is that we haven't, there have been no things until now.
Yeah, there's no ape, there's no monkey of sorts, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even large apes were not even really in the public consciousness. When were gorillas? Do you know when gorillas were discovered?
Were first seen. Was it the late 1800s?
Yeah, the 1850s.
Oh, earlier than I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Because they were a myth for a long time too.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things that people like to draw a connection with. Yeah. Is that the gorillas in the Congo region. They talk about those as we didn't know about them for so long. I mean, that starts to fall away now because now we've known about them for 150 years, but we have a lot more evidence of gorillas than we do of Sasquatch, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something that people always like to compare to.
Makes sense. I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I do think that, they were considered, you're looking at those gorillas, those are Africa, right?
Yeah.
You have orangutans, and they're like, they're Borneo.
But they have these distinct places that they are originated in. And so it's very unusual for there to be anything like that up in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes,
or
exactly.
in the United States or Canada at all. So,
yeah, and that sort of gives way to the notion of Sasquatch being a prehistoric human, which is the theory that Bernard Heuvelmans subscribed to.
That it's a missing link?
Yeah, that not that it is like a ape type animal, but it's actually, the descendant of a Neanderthal or something like that. Because then you can kind of explain why it's here better than being like, it's an offshoot of a gorilla or an orangutan or a chimpanzee or something like that.
Right. They walked over from Europe, crossed the Bering Strait, and landed in the Pacific Northwest and just stayed in the deep, deep woods until some guys discovered them in the 1950s.
Which, and I'll give you that's not like the craziest notion, right? Except that the more we learn about our ancestors, human ancestors, the more they don't fit with what the depiction of Sasquatch is.
Yeah.
And we talked about this a little bit in the Minnesota Iceman series.
Mm-hmm. Early hominids were tiny.
Yeah. We had this idea that they had to be these like giant, somewhat barbaric type of like big smashy Hulk type figures, but they're not. They're actually small, they're lean, they're like lithe.
Yeah. I think we were in like Washington DC or something at the Anthropology Museum or something like that. Yeah. And I remember they had them
Smithsonian. Yeah.
The Smithsonian, they had them in like they had different bipeds, early humans in like little not cages. They were like in these little,
they were in
like
these
glass
little
cases?
display cases. Yeah, they had the skulls at the height that they would actually be standing, right?
Not only that, but they had like actual life. They created them.
Right,
They created them with like clay and hair, and it was beautiful. Like they actually like looked so real. And I remember walking around, seeing them all, and they were all my height. And we were all looking at each other.
Yeah, and you're not a tall person.
I know. And we were all like this. Like I was literally looking at my family. I was like, oh, like they're tiny like me. They're short like me. It was so cute. And so it's kind of like the idea of them being big and imposing is silly.
Yeah, it doesn't fit historically, and that's the problem that we keep running into with these sorts of things. The more we learn, the more the traditional model of Sasquatch just straight up doesn't fit that missing link hypothesis. So then it morphs again into like, maybe it's an ape instead. But if it's an ape, then you have to classify it with ape-like behavior. And as we talked about, where are the nests, where are these sorts of things? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I would believe it more if they said Bigfoot looked like me.
Looked like EJ?
We're just like small and kind of hairless.
Small, skinny, hairless. Yeah,
just
makes
wandering.
Way more sense. Yeah, running around with like primitive stone tools.
Yeah.
Would be much, much more believable, actually.
Yeah. I think I know my new calling now when we're done with this.
Just go be a what?
Just go be a hairy biped in the woods. If I disappear, that's where I go, guys, okay? That's where I go.
Yeah, I'm just going to start
where
doing the
I am.
podcast just with Yotzi.
Yeah. It would probably be an improvement. All right. There you go.
So yeah, next time we are going to talk about some encounters that people had. We're finally going to get to the tracks, which are, of course, like the cornerstone of Bigfoot research. Mm-hmm. And we're going to continue our tale of John Green and Rene Dahinden as they continue to build this mythology together.
So enjoy your freaking day.
Yeah. Everybody, go. Just take some time today. Go on a little Sasquatch hunt.
Yeah. Walk around in the woods.
Yeah.
Enjoy nature.
Even if it's not your Centennial, just go. Hang out in nature,
Be one with nature.
Grab a stick, smack it on some trees.
Yeah.
See if you can bring them over.
Yeah. Cook some bacon.
They
like bacon.
Yeah, they do like bacon. And remember, send us in your recipes for the Sasquatch Sunrise cocktails. We're going to try out some of these that you've been sending in. So.
Yes.
All right. Thank you all so much for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
Be safe out there.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the Paranormal History Podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways to show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on Instagram @slayingmonsterspodcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.